Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll be sharing my time with the member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill. Madam Speaker, I rise today with a very heavy heart to speak in support of the invocation of the Emergencies Act by our government and the motion in this House to affirm the government's decision. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded lands of the Algonquin people, and I want to thank the many truckers in my riding of Scarborough Rouge Park and the hundreds and thousands of truckers around the world who have helped us throughout the pandemic. Ever since I can remember, Madam Speaker, I have gone to protest. We were protesting the rights of Tamils on the island of Sri Lanka from the time I was maybe 4 or 5. After the anti-Tamil program in 1983, I demonstrated for weeks on end at the Indian consulate in Dublin, Ireland. Later in the 80s, I protested apartheid in Canada, apartheid of South Africa in Canada. In the 1990s, I protested the cuts to education in Ontario under then Premier Bob Rae. In 1995, I organized a vigil and protest right here in Parliament Hill as Tamils were displaced in the north and east of the island. In the 2000s, I extended legal supports to protest at Queen's Park, a number of them throughout the decade. In 2009, I was right here in Ottawa and provided legal support for those who were protesting against the Tamil genocide in Sri Lanka. This has been referred in the last several days as the Tamil protest, and it started in early February and ended in May of 2009. This included similar protests on University Avenue in front of the US consulate, and I worked with then Chief of Police for the City of Toronto and now the Minister of Emergency Preparedness towards ensuring those protests were peaceful. I can recall my nephew, who was 10 years old at that time, who went to many of these protests with my late father-in-law. And my partner and I took our 4-month-old in frigid temperatures to protest on Dundas Square in the winter of 2009. During this time, I attended protests in Washington, New York, and Geneva. I'm therefore an ardent believer in the right to protest as a tool of dissent and political advocacy. And I believe in the right to protest, and I also believe that children should be part of protest, but not be used as a shield in an illegal occupation. Since January 29, 2022, Canada has been gripped by what started off as protesters turned into illegal blockaders turned occupiers. Many colleagues across the aisle have talked about their interactions with the illegal blockaders. And I have a great deal of respect for many of my colleagues across the aisle. They've spoken about their interaction with some truckers and other protesters, and their ability to walk through the illegal blockades and understand and empathize. Sadly, Madam Speaker, I don't have that privilege. Many in this House do not have that privilege. Even though, as parliamentarians, we're supposed to enjoy the same level of privilege, I do not share that privilege. They have called for the overthrow of a government, and de facto, all of us serving in this House. They brought symbols of hate, the Confederate flag, Nazi symbols, and others to the protest. They have destroyed the pride flag. They have threatened media. They have taken food from a homeless shelter. So please forgive my colleagues opposite if I don't feel the same level of confidence in engaging with these so-called protesters. I would never cast dispersions over a group based on the facts of a few, based on the acts of a few. But after 23 days, many who may feel strongly about the type of hate and vitriol we see on the streets should distance themselves, condemn them, including the Conservative Party of Canada. The impact of these illegal blockades on Ottawa and in Coutts, in Emerson, Surrey, and Windsor are profound. These illegal blockades are different in form and substance to the hundreds of protests we see here in Ottawa annually. That is why, after considerable consultation and engagement, our government invoked the Emergencies Act on February 14, 2022. We did so after the City of Ottawa and Windsor and others invoked emergencies in their municipalities and after the province of Ontario did so. Ultimately, Madam Speaker, Canada is a rule of law country. By declaring a public order emergency under the Emergencies Act, we follow the law and are acting within it. There are clear conditions set out in the Emergencies Act in order for a public order emergency to be declared. Our government believes those conditions have been met. But I want to just highlight the preamble of the Emergencies Act. And it says, whereas the Governor and Council, in taking such special temporary measures, would be subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights, and must have regard to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, particularly with respect to those fundamental rights that are not to be limited or abridged, even in a national emergency. Any and all action our government takes will be subject to the Charter, and it is the solemn responsibility of the Attorney General to ensure this. The Emergencies Act can only be invoked in specific, serious circumstances that amount to a national emergency. In order to meet the threshold for a national emergency, 3 conditions must be met. First, we must be in a situation that either 1, seriously endangers the lives, health, or safety of Canadians and exceeds the capacity of authority of a province to deal with it, or 2, seriously threaten the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada. Second, the provinces and territories' capacity to handle the situation must be considered insufficient or show gaps. And third, we must conclude that the situation cannot be handled adequately under any other Canadian law, including provincial and territorial laws. Our government believes these conditions were met, and we tabled an explanation of the reasons for issuing this declaration as required by this Act. We also tabled, as required, a report on any consultation with the provinces with respect to the declaration. And I would especially like to highlight and thank the support of the province of British Columbia, Ontario, Newfoundland, and Labrador, as noted in the document of invoking the Act to respond to this national emergency. As you've seen, our government has introduced targeted orders under the Act. While the Act technically applies to all of Canada, we have been very careful to tailor orders to be focused as possible, and only those places affected by blockades and illegal occupations will see any change at all. We've introduced the following 6 temporary measures to bring the situation under control. 1, regulation and prohibition of public assemblies that lead to a breach of peace and go beyond lawful protest. 2, designating and securing places where blockades are to be prohibited. 3, directing persons to render essential services to relieve impacts of blockades on Canada's economy. 4, authorizing the direct financial institutions to render essential services to relieve impact of blockades. Enabling the RCMP to enforce municipal laws and provincial offences. And finally, imposition of fines or imprisonment for contravention of any order or regulation made under Section 19 of the Emergencies Act. Madam Speaker, there are a number of safeguards that are built in this Act, and as required by the Act, the Prime Minister met with the Cabinet as well as Premiers prior to invoking the Act. Having now declared the Act, we tabled the declaration within 2 days, and for Parliament to be able to debate this within 7 days. In the coming days, a parliamentary committee will be struck, and also an inquiry will be called. The declaration lasts for 30 days and can be revoked at any time the will of the Parliament. The situation, Madam Speaker, is urgent, and as Acting Chief of the Ottawa Police, Steve Bell, cited yesterday, they could not have been able to start or undertake the enormous operation currently taking place in Ottawa without the temporary measures extended to it by the Emergencies Act. We're invoking the Emergencies Act and to end illegal blockades and occupations. We're invoking it to restore the rights of those who cannot safely walk the streets of downtown Ottawa and other places. I look forward to the questions, Madam Speaker. Thank you.